In the early years, the Pagans were relatively small compared to their counterparts out west. They began as a regional riding club, mostly based in Maryland, with a few chapters in neighboring states. At first, their activities were mostly limited to wild parties, bar fights, and illegal drag racing. But as their numbers grew, so did their ambition. By 1965, the club had taken on a more militaristic structure, and Dobkin's vision began to evolve. Borrowing elements from military hierarchy, the Pagans introduced ranks such as president, vice president, sergeant-at-arms, and road captain. Each member had a specific role, and rules were enforced with brutal precision. This period also marked the Pagans' transition into a true outlaw club. They embraced the one-percenter mentality, a term that had emerged after the American Motorcyclist Association claimed that 99% of motorcyclists were law-abiding citizens, leaving the remaining 1% to live outside the law. The Pagans proudly declared themselves part of that 1%, wearing it as a badge of honor. Their club colors became infamous: a blue denim vest with a patch depicting the Norse fire giant Surtur, wielding a flaming sword. The fire giant symbolized chaos, destruction, and dominance, a fitting emblem for what the Pagans were becoming. With their identity firmly established, the Pagans began to engage in more serious criminal activity. Drug trafficking, extortion, and weapons smuggling became central to their operations. The East Coast biker scene was chaotic and unregulated at the time, which gave the Pagans an opportunity to dominate territories. One of the first significant incidents that cemented their reputation for violence occurred in 1967, during a confrontation with a rival motorcycle club in Baltimore. The Barons MC, a small local group, made the mistake of disrespecting a high-ranking pagan at a biker rally. What followed was a brutal attack that left several barons hospitalized and effectively dismantled their club. This event marked the Pagans' first step toward violent territorial dominance. The Pagans had established themselves as the most powerful outlaw motorcycle club on the East Coast, with chapters stretching from Maryland to Pennsylvania and beyond. They quickly developed a reputation for extreme violence, particularly toward rival clubs and anyone who crossed them. The 1970s were a turning point for the Pagans. The club began expanding its influence into major cities like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and New York, where they tapped into the booming drug trade. At the heart of their operations was methamphetamine, which was becoming increasingly popular among working-class communities. The Pagans controlled distribution networks that stretched from rural meth labs in Pennsylvania to urban markets in New York City. They also developed strong ties to East Coast organized crime families, particularly in Philadelphia and New Jersey, where they worked as muscle for the Italian Mafia and helped move drugs and weapons. During this time, law enforcement began taking notice. The FBI and local police launched investigations into the Pagans, but the club was notoriously difficult to infiltrate. Members were highly secretive, and anyone suspected of being a snitch was dealt with swiftly, often with extreme violence. One of the most infamous incidents of this era occurred in 1971, when a former member-turned-informant was found beaten and burned to death in rural Pennsylvania. The message was clear: betrayal would not be tolerated. By the mid-1970s, the Pagans were no longer just a regional power. They had grown into a national force with dozens of chapters and hundreds of members. But with that growth came new enemies. Their most dangerous rival was the Hells Angels, who had begun expanding into the East Coast in an attempt to dominate the lucrative drug markets in New York and New Jersey. The rivalry between the Pagans and the Hells Angels quickly turned violent. Both clubs engaged in brawls, shootings, and bombings in an escalating war for control of territory. One of the bloodiest confrontations took place in 1974, during a motorcycle rally in Philadelphia, where a massive brawl between the two clubs left several people hospitalized and one dead. In 1976, the conflict reached a boiling point when the Pagans allegedly planted a car bomb targeting a Hells Angels clubhouse in New York. Although no one was killed, the incident sparked a federal investigation that would haunt the Pagans for years to come. By the late 1970s, the Pagans were on the radar of federal law enforcement. The ATF and the FBI launched a joint investigation into the club's involvement in drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and organized violence. One of the biggest blows to the club came in 1979, when several high-ranking members were arrested on racketeering charges. While some members managed to avoid prison time, the arrests exposed the inner workings of the Pagans and solidified their status as one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country. Let's check out an infamous pagan member. Born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Zwiebel grew up in a tough working-class neighborhood that offered few opportunities outside of manual labor or petty crime. By the time he was in his late teens, he was already known to local law enforcement for his involvement in small-time hustles and street brawls. Zwiebel became drawn to the growing biker culture that was spreading across the East Coast. The Pagans Motorcycle Club, which had started in Maryland, was expanding into Philadelphia, recruiting young men with a taste for rebellion and violence. Zwiebel was a natural fit. His cold, calculating nature and ability to handle himself in a fight quickly earned him respect among the Pagans' ranks. Zwiebel had become a patched member of the club, officially part of the Brotherhood. It didn't take long for him to rise through the ranks. His leadership potential was clear, and his calm but ruthless approach to enforcing club rules set him apart. As Zwiebel ascended the ranks, he a trusted enforcer for the club's top leadership. The Pagans had transformed from a group of rowdy bikers into a powerful criminal organization, deeply involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and weapons smuggling. They needed men like Danny, unflinching, disciplined, and loyal to a fault. Zwiebel was known for handling club business with brutal efficiency. If a member stepped of line, whether it was skimming money from a drug deal or disrespecting a higher-ranking officer, Danny was sent to administer punishment. Sometimes that meant a beating. Other times it meant something far worse. One of the most infamous incidents involving Zwiebel occurred in 1975, when a disgruntled member attempted to defect from Thiens and join a rival club. According to law enforcement testimony from informants, Zwiebel personally oversaw the man's removal, a chilling euphemism for his violent execution. The body was never found. For the Pagans, it sent a clear message: no one leaves the club alive. The Pagans had become a dominant force in the East Coast methamphetamine trade. Rural Pennsylvania was dotted with clandestine meth labs, many of which were under Pagan control. Zwiebel became one of the key overseers of the operation, working with local cooks and distributors to supply meth to cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New York. Zwiebel's role was twofold: logistics and enforcement. He coordinated shipments, ensured loyalty among the lower-level dealers, and handled any problems that arose. Those who crossed the Pagans or tried to cheat them often disappeared without a trace. Law enforcement believed Zwiebel was responsible for multiple murders tied to the drug trade, but solid evidence was hard to come by. The Pagans' activities caught the attention of federal law enforcement agencies. The FBI and ATF launched a series of investigations into the club, focusing on drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and organized violence. Despite their efforts, infiltrating the Pagans proved difficult. Members were extremely secretive, and Zwiebel was known for his paranoia and meticulous attention to detail. Law enforcement finally scored a victory when they arrested several high-ranking Pagans members on drug charges. While Zwiebel managed to evade capture, the case exposed many of the club's secrets. Federal agents began building a case against him, tying him to multiple drug shipments and violent incidents. By the early 1980s, the walls were closing in on Zwiebel. Undercover agents had infiltrated parts of the Pagans' network, and several former members turned informants were providing details about his activities. In 1983, federal prosecutors finally indicted him on charges of drug trafficking, conspiracy, and racketeering. The trial that followed was one of the biggest federal cases against the Pagans at the time. Prosecutors painted Zwiebel as a key figure in the club's criminal empire, detailing his role in drug operations, violent enforcement tactics, and extortion schemes. Several witnesses testified against him, describing how he had personally overseen brutal beatings and orchestrated drug shipments across state lines. In 1984, Zwiebel was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His conviction marked a significant blow to the Pagans, but it also cemented his legend within the outlaw biker world. Even from behind bars, Danny the Deacon's name carried weight, a reminder of the bloody rise of the Pagans Motorcycle Club. Two empires ruled the streets of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania: the LaRocca crime family and the Pagans Motorcycle Club. Though these two organizations operated in different worlds, one man stood at the intersection of both: Anthony "Rocky" LaRocca. As a member of the Pagans Motorcycle Club and the nephew of John LaRocca, the powerful boss of the Pittsburgh Mafia, Rocky acted as a bridge between outlaw bikers and traditional organized crime. His dual role gave the Pagans access to Mafia-backed narcotics pipelines and provided the LaRocca family with muscle and street-level distribution networks that only a gang like the Pagans could provide. But such alliances come at a cost, and for Rocky, it would ultimately mean becoming a target of both law enforcement and his own underworld. Anthony "Rocky" LaRocca was born into a life of privilege and danger. As the nephew of John LaRocca, the longtime boss of the Pittsburgh Mafia, Rocky grew up surrounded by the trappings of organized crime. His uncle was one of the most powerful mob figures in Pennsylvania, known for his calm but ruthless leadership. But unlike many of his relatives who stayed firmly within the Mafia's world, Rocky chose a different path. Drawn to the rough-and-tumble life of the outlaw biker scene, he joined the Pagans Motorcycle Club, which had grown into one of the most feared biker gangs on the East Coast. At first glance, the Pagans and the LaRocca family might seem like unlikely allies. The Pagans MC were known for their chaotic, violent reputation, dealing in methamphetamine and weapons smuggling, while the LaRocca family prided themselves on running a disciplined, old-school mafia operation focused on gambling, loan sharking, and heroin trafficking. But Rocky saw an opportunity. As a trusted member of both worlds, he became the key figure in building a mutually beneficial relationship. The Pagans needed reliable drug suppliers, and the Mafia saw an opportunity to expand their narcotics distribution through the bikers' network of street-level dealers. Together, they created a powerful pipeline. Heroin and cocaine supplied by the Mafia flowed through Pagan-controlled territories, with Rocky at the center of the operation. The Golden Era was marked by expansion and violent conflict for both the Pagans and the LaRocca family. The drug trade was thriving, and partnership enabled both organizations to amass millions of dollars. But with success came territorial disputes and new enemies. The Pagans found themselves in bloody turf wars with rival motorcycle clubs like the Breed and the Outlaws, while the LaRocca family had its own battles with other Mafia factions. One of the most infamous incidents of this period occurred in 1981, when a dispute over a drug shipment led to a deadly shootout in Pittsburgh, allegedly orchestrated by Rocky and his Pagan associates. The event drew the attention of federal authorities, marking the beginning of a long investigation into both the Pagans and the LaRocca family. By the mid-1980s, law enforcement was closing in on the criminal alliance. The FBI had launched a multi-year investigation into organized crime in Pittsburgh, targeting the LaRocca family and their drug connections with outlaw motorcycle clubs. Rocky became a key figure in the investigation, with federal agents suspecting him of orchestrating multiple drug shipments and violent reprisals. The pressure mounted when several former Pagans turned informants, providing critical details about the club's drug operations and its ties to the LaRocca family. For Rocky, the walls were closing in. Federal prosecutors indicted several high-ranking members of the Pagans and the LaRocca family, including Rocky, on racketeering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy charges. The trial was a media sensation, exposing the deep connections between the Mafia and outlaw bikers. The trial marked the end of an era. Anthony "Rocky" LaRocca was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. His conviction was part of a broader crackdown that severely weakened the Pittsburgh Mafia and dealt a significant blow to the Pagans' drug operations in Pennsylvania. Though Rocky's alliance had brought incredible power and profit to both groups, it also attracted deadly enemies and relentless law enforcement attention, ultimately leading to their downfall. The murder of Dr. James Kaufman in 2018 sent shockwaves through New Jersey's underworld, revealing the drug trafficking, gang connections, and murder for hire. At the heart of the case was John the Egyptian Catchbalian, a former Pagan turned enforcer in the broader criminal network. Catchbalian wasn't a suspect in the murder but played a central role in the aftershock, charged with witness tampering and cyber harassment of key individuals connected to the investigation. The story begins with the murder of April Kaufman, a well-known radio personality, in 2012. The murder was initially a mystery, but over time, investigators unraveled a drug trafficking ring operating out of James Kaufman's medical practice, with ties to the Pagans Motorcycle Club. Authorities eventually arrested Ferdinand "Freddy" Augello, a high-ranking Pagan, for orchestrating April's murder after a dispute over the drug business. Augello's conviction opened the floodgates for further investigations, pulling in others connected to the club. Catchbalian, a former Pagan turned freelance enforcer, was one of those figures. While not involved in the murder itself, he found himself implicated in a different way, through intimidation and threats against witnesses. In 2018, Catchbalian was charged with witness tampering after allegedly using social media to harass and intimidate a key witness in the Kaufman case. According to prosecutors, he posted threatening comments and publicly humiliated the witness, hoping to discredit their testimony. Cyber harassment became Catchbalian's weapon of choice. He used Facebook and other platforms to send veiled threats, calling the witness a liar and hinting at retaliation. His posts were designed to incite fear, ensuring the witness would either back down or lose credibility in court. As the investigation into Catchbalian's actions progressed, law enforcement realized that intimidation tactics were part of a larger strategy by individuals connected to the case. Authorities alleged that Catchbalian was acting on behalf of other associates in the network who feared the witness's testimony could seal their fate. Catchbalian's past as a Pagan enforcer only added to the intimidation factor. Known for his volatile temper and connections to violent figures, Catchbalian had a reputation for settling disputes through force. In August 2018, Catchbalian was arrested and charged with witness tampering and cyber harassment. The arrest was part of a broader effort to protect witnesses in the Kaufman case, and to send a message that intimidation would not be tolerated. During the trial, prosecutors painted Catchbalian as a dangerous manipulator who used social media as a weapon. His posts were presented as evidence, revealing a pattern of psychological warfare and threats. Kachbalian's defense argued that his posts were merely opinions and personal grievances, but the jury saw them as calculated threats designed to silence key voices in the case. Kachbalian was ultimately convicted and sentenced for his role in witness tampering, further unraveling the remnants of the Pagans' influence in the broader conspiracy. His conviction served as a warning to others in the criminal underworld. Even the shadows of social media are not safe from the law. Though Kachbalian's role was small compared to others like Freddie Ogello, his actions had a significant impact on the case, highlighting the lengths to which individuals would go to protect their secrets. For John the Egyptian Kachbalian, his loyalty to old ties cost him his freedom. David Bart Barbato, the national president of the Pagans Motorcycle Club, stood at the pinnacle of one of the most feared clubs on the East Coast. But with that power came a growing list of enemies, not just rival clubs, but also federal law enforcement. By 2009, after years of undercover investigations, Barbato became the target of a sweeping federal indictment. His trial would expose the inner workings of the Pagans and mark a turning point for the club. Barbato's path to power within the Pagans began in West Virginia, one of the club's strongholds. He quickly rose through the ranks, earning a reputation as a calm but ruthless leader with a keen understanding of both club politics and street-level operations. By the early 2000s, he had secured the position of national president, overseeing the club's operations across multiple states. Under his leadership, the Pagans expanded their influence, becoming heavily involved in drug trafficking, extortion, and weapons smuggling. Barbato was known for keeping a tight grip on power, enforcing club rules with brutal efficiency. Loyalty was rewarded, but betrayal was punished with violence. By the mid-2000s, the FBI and ATF were well aware of the Pagans' growing power. The club's involvement in methamphetamine distribution, illegal firearms sales, and violent clashes with rivals made it a top target for federal prosecutors. The investigation into Barbato's activities was part of a larger effort to dismantle the club's criminal network. Undercover agents infiltrated Pagan chapters, gathering evidence of drug deals, illegal weapons transactions, and violent enforcement tactics. In 2009, the federal government launched Operation 1%er, resulting in a massive RICO, racketeer-influenced and corrupt organizations, indictment. Barbato and 55 other Pagans were charged with crimes ranging from drug trafficking and racketeering to attempted murder. Barbato's trial was a high-profile affair, drawing media attention and further exposing the Pagans' secretive world. Prosecutors presented evidence that Barbato had orchestrated drug operations and violent attacks on rival clubs. Testimony from undercover agents and former club members painted him as a mastermind of organized crime, who ruled the Pagans with an iron fist. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from wiretapped conversations and intercepted communications, in which Barbato allegedly discussed club business, including violence against informants and rivals. Witnesses described beatings, murder plots, and drug shipments that Barbato oversaw as part of his leadership role. The trial also revealed the militaristic structure of the Pagans, with Barbato at the top of a well-organized hierarchy that extended across the East Coast. Prosecutors argued that the club operated as a criminal enterprise, with Barbato acting as its CEO. In late 2010, after months of testimony and deliberation, Barbato was convicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine and illegal firearms possession. The court sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison, a significant blow to the Pagans' national leadership. Barbato's conviction marked the end of an era for the club. With their national president behind bars, the Pagans faced a period of internal turmoil and increased law enforcement scrutiny. Though Barbato's downfall weakened the Pagans temporarily, the club has shown remarkable resilience. New leaders emerged, and despite continued federal investigations, the Pagans remained a powerful force on the East Coast. For David Bart Barbato, however, prison became his new reality, a stark contrast to the life of power and control he once held. His story is still talked about in the outlaw motorcycle world, where even the most powerful figures admire the old guard. Known for its extreme violence, ruthless power struggles, and bitter rivalry with the Hells Angels, the Pagans have left a bloody trail across several states. But their history is more than just clashes with rivals. It's also filled with stories of unspeakable crimes and law enforcement crackdowns that have shaped the club's dark legacy. The following events are among the most notorious in the Pagans' history, a chilling reminder of the violence, betrayal, and chaos that surround the club. On March 7, 1975, two 15-year-old girls from Ogden, Pennsylvania made a decision they thought would lead to adventure. They planned to run away from home and make their way to New York, leaving behind their quiet lives in search of something more exciting. What awaited them was not freedom, but a 5-day ordeal of terror, violence, and survival at the hands of members of the Pagans Motorcycle Club. This is the kind of stuff you didn't get to see on the Sons of Anarchy. It started like so many runaway cases. The two girls left home without telling their families where they were going. Their plan was to head to New York City, a place they believed would offer them the excitement they craved. But along the way, they encountered members of the Pagans Motorcycle Club, a feared outlaw biker gang with a reputation for violence and criminal activity. Whether the girls willingly accepted the ride at first or were coerced remains unclear. But what is certain is that they were taken to a clubhouse in Queens, New York, where their nightmare began. The Pagans Clubhouse in Queens was a hub for the gang's activities, a place outsiders rarely entered and even more rarely left. For the next 2 days, the girls were held captive and subjected to repeated abuse by 30 to 40 men. The captors showed no mercy. The girls were isolated in separate rooms, starved of food and water, and systematically abused by the gang members. No one came to help, and every moment felt like an eternity. For the men of the Pagans, this was just another act of dominance in their chaotic and violent world. For the girls, it was a living nightmare, one they feared they would never escape. After 2 days, the gang decided it was too risky to keep the girls at the clubhouse in Queens. They relocated them to a house in Selden, New York, a quiet suburban neighborhood far from the prying eyes of the city. The house was an unassuming suburban home, blending in with the surrounding area. Inside, however, it became a prison for the girls. For the next 3 days, they endured further abuse. The captors, confident they had evaded any suspicion, grew careless, leaving the girls unguarded for longer stretches of time. On March 11, 1975, after 5 days of captivity, the girls saw their chance. Their captors were sleeping. Seizing the opportunity, the girls made a desperate escape, running barefoot through the neighborhood until they found a house where the occupants agreed to help. They burst into the home, crying and begging for help, telling the residents of the horrors they had endured. The homeowners immediately called the police, who rushed to the scene and took the girls into protective custody. The girls recounted their ordeal to detectives, a harrowing tale of abduction, repeated assaults, and confinement. Their testimony was enough for police to act swiftly. Later that same day, police launched a raid on the Selden home. What they found corroborated the girls' story: evidence of narcotics use, signs of captivity, and other clues that confirmed the house had been used as a holding place. Authorities arrested 6 individuals, including a woman who had allegedly played a role in the girls' captivity. The charges included multiple counts of rape, unlawful imprisonment, and narcotics violations. The Selden house was more than just a suburban hideout. It was part of a network of safe houses used by the Pagans Motorcycle Club, not only for hiding from the law, but also for storing drugs and holding captives. The story sent shockwaves through the community and the nation. Media outlets covered the case extensively, exposing the brutality of the Pagans Motorcycle Club and the dangers of outlaw biker gangs. For many in Ogden and nearby towns, it was a terrifying wake-up call. The arrests were a victory for law enforcement, but the case also revealed just how deeply entrenched the Pagans were in illegal activities across New York and the East Coast. The victims received some measure of justice, but many questions remained unanswered. How many other victims had there been? How far did the Pagans' network of safe houses and criminal enterprises reach? The 2 girls returned to their families, but the trauma they endured would stay with them forever.